Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I've been doing a little bit more research today, or in recent days anyhow. I don't always do these in just a day. This one in particular I didn't do in just a day because it is Lowpass2. I'll go back there. And what Lowpass2 is a revisit of my Lowpass filter that I released a long time ago. And what that is a special kind of IIR, which means infinite impulse response low-pass filter, that does like a frequency modulation thing. That soft-hard control is set up so that it can roll off harder if the input signal is very low, or alternately roll off harder if the input signal is very high. Now, how that works is it doesn't sound like some sort of, envelope filter like you'd put in a guitar, because that's happening on the sample by sample basis. So it kind of averages out. And the reason I'm revisiting it is because the original version did a calculation to try to make the low pass, rather than go from completely open to completely silent across the 0 to 1 of the control, it tried to scale it so that if you were using a higher sample rate, it would be doing roughly, the same settings would give you about the same roll-off. And that turned out not desirable. There were people who were using high sample rates who went, the hell, and they were trying to, get it to open up completely and so on. And they were like, please, will you help? And I said, I'll give it a shot. Here's the thing, I've also added something else to Lowpass2, and I won't say changed it very much, but you'll have to get used to it all over again, because again, the low pass setting, it'll work from sample rate down to nothing over whatever sample rate you're using, and it now has poles of filtration. It'll go up to 4 poles. And what that means is a more striking roll-off effect. Like, I can demonstrate that by putting it to, say, 1 pole. This also works as a kind of parallel dry-wet. So going from 0 to 1 is the same as doing dry-wet. And then as you keep adding them, it's adding more stages of the low pass. And here's what this sounds like. 1 pole sounds kind of like this. It's a nice mellow roll-off. It uses my IIR filtering thing where I'm interleaving the samples. So this is a kind of low pass that doesn't effectively cut super duper high frequency sounds. Like if you have something, if you're at 44.1K and you have a sound and it's at 22K, this low pass isn't really going to affect that very much. But that helps it give you more clarity on the stuff that you are filtering. And here's what it sounds like when you start using more poles. Two, 3, 4. Maybe that's starting to sound a little more useful because you can get a steeper filter out of it. We can have low frequency stuff like this, or very bright stuff and then start rolling it off a little. There's your low pass for a start. This is the same IIR stuff that I use in a bunch of different, this is a building block EQ technology. But here's what this soft hard does. It might be easier to hear if I use it on a very bassy sound. You'll note that using the poles, this becomes a more striking effect. So I'll show you a little bit of what it's about, and then I'll show you it pushed to the limit, and then I'll show you it on pink noise, which will give an interesting effect for sound design, you might notice. This might be a little bit of an ace in the hole for certain kinds of sound design purposes. So now we've got a regular low pass But if we push it to a direction or the other direction, you start rolling off more, but something is happening. As it works, I'm pretty sure that the soft is making louder sounds and rolling them off faster. So as the waveform gets bigger, it starts rolling it off, and it's a sort of evening out effect. Hard is the opposite in that for hard, it'll start rolling off harder on the quiet sounds, and the louder you get, the more frequencies it's going to let through. In fact, that kind of, the stuff I was talking about with the sound design uses that behavior quite strongly. So let's show you what that is about. If you go slightly softer, it's muffling the high frequencies in a characteristic way. And you'll notice as you push it, and we're on 4 poles, remember, you'll start to hear it break up. You can make it literally mess up the sound by pushing it too far. For instance, that's an unusual noise. So you have this sort of weird thumping. So that's an interesting behavior. This is has to do with the way that the soft versus hard thing works. It'll be more consistent on an electronic beat like this, where the levels that it gets to are very consistent. And we'll compare that with, say, 0, where this is what a low pass sounds like without messing with it. And then you get this unusual effect when the low pass is filtering off all of the louder noises and only the quietest stuff gets through. It's kind of isolating the kick drum in a very characteristic way. Now what happens when we go the other extreme is quite different. We're still getting that isolating effect to an extent, because that's one of the loudest sounds in here, so if we're doing a low pass, the kick is always going to be coming through on this track. But we have spikiness punching through in a weird way. And as we bring it back up, we'll notice that it goes very distorted. We've got this sort of crackliness. As sounds get louder, they're kicking open the filter a little bit. It's going brighter a little bit. And since it's on 4 poles, for instance, I can demonstrate this. That's very spiky. But if I reduce the poles, we're really hearing the behavior still, but it's letting through more because it's not as steep of a roll-off. So this is kind of a way a crunchy roll-off, whereas this is a softer, mellower roll-off that rolls harder if you hit it with transients. Compare that with that, and you'll notice that it is very different. But wait, there's more. I mentioned there was a sound design purpose that you can do, and I'll quickly show you that before posting this plugin and letting people have it. Because I'm pretty sure that at this point, those who like this kind of thing will be already going, give me this plugin now, that sounds great. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to open up BitShift Gain. Goodbye, YouTube monetization. They have a tendency of thinking that I'm saying another word when I say the name of this plugin, which you can see on the screen. You might not want to say these syllables in quick conjunction, or YouTube will get mad at you. But that's as may be. Here is a test oscillator for doing pink noise, and we'll take it down to say 3 dB down maybe, or 3 bits down. That's like 18 dB down, and bam. If you want it louder, I can make it a little bit louder. The loudness of this is always a contention with people, I feel. It's constantly this thing of like, it's not loud enough. Oh, now it's too loud. Oh, now it's not loud enough. So let's do 2 down. Boom. It's a nice full sound, right? Well, we've got this noise, but what happens to noise if you hit it with this variation in the roll-off? And I'll show you what that is. Now I'm hitting it with 4 poles of filtration. Again, we can just make it more pink noisy by using less. 4 is making it go nice and steep. Would be 24 dB octave or something like that. It's not designed to be a brick wall filter, but this just gives you more color. It gives you more character. Here's what happens when we go to soft. Notice we've got a little kind of crackliness going on because this method of altering and manipulating the roll-off has some funny effects to it. Like with this, we've got a weird sort of sputtering going on. And maybe if we like remove a little bit of this amount, because this is rather a lot, it's sounding kind of like one of those wind noise generators. Where it's like, okay, this is meant to sound like a wind noise, but really what it sounds like is a large drum with slats on it and canvas, and it's an artificial wind noise generator. Let's bring a little more of the sound of the canvas in. But wait, there's more. We can do that, but let's try going to hard. This becomes even more interesting because rather than keeping high frequency stuff that's sort of tucked into the inside of the, like when stuff is quiet, it'll let that through a little bit. This lets through the sort of front edges of the random variations. And you start getting a wind blasting around the outside edge of your building kind of thing. This is reminiscent of being outside in a hurricane or whatever, and your microphone is just being obliterated. And this is the most exaggerated version, so we can dial it back a little bit. And then bring a little bit more in. That's some high-speed noise. That's about as fast as we can stand to go right now, so let's just slow it down. There you have it. Lowpass2 with some special little features that the previous one didn't have, mostly having to do with the poles and being able to exaggerate that soft-hard effect. And you can use it as a filter. You can use it in a mix. It's reasonably efficient as far as that kind of stuff goes. It has the most current updates on the floating point noise shaping, the floating point dither stuff that I do. But it might be most popular with sound designers for the reasons that I've just shown. So this is the kind of stuff that you get when you have the time and opportunity to just experiment with things and try stuff like, what do we get if we take a simple IIR filter and modulate its intensity by how loud the input sample is coming in, and then do 4 poles of that using the original intensity of the sound coming in. It's this sort of idea where you not necessarily know what it would do at first, and then you try it and discover that it did something like that. Then you add 4 poles of additional processing and implement it in the right way and get something like what I've just shown you, namely the amazing high-speed zipping around sound design sound. I think that will come in all kinds of handy, and the best thing about it is that you can apply that to any other kind of sound. Like if you have sounds of a car chase or something like that, and you're doing sound design that involves you being inside the car and you need to modulate some kinds of sounds that you're bringing in to make it sound as if it is happening outside the vehicle that you're speeding around in, apply the same filter to it. It'll do the same kind of thing, and it'll probably be consistent with the sound of the noise. This is fun stuff to do, and the reason I can still do it is because I'm supported by Patreon. Now, I am trying to cast a somewhat wider net, so if you're interested in supporting my work and have had a problem with Patreon this entire time or whatever, talk to me. I'm setting up a thing called Ko-fi, and I'm going to have to pay to have them operate in a similar way to Patreon. And I'm not in a great big hurry because I don't think Patreon is going to give me a problem. They have not failed me yet. But it's only sensible to have like fallback plans and things. So I am setting that up. I'll be setting it up in very much the same way that I intend the Patreon to work. Namely, it'll be in increments of buying 1 plugin a year. As if you ran across this and I told you this costs $50 to get it with perpetual support and perpetual updates and the source code. And please give me $50 for that. Next year, maybe I'll make another plugin that you like. The Patreon also lets you pledge smaller amounts, which I don't really push people to do. And when I finish setting up the Ko-fi, it's going to be entirely in increments of equivalent to $50 a year. And the idea is, if I'm doing this work and it's good, act as if I was selling it commercially. And if you can't do that, then I want to be supporting you rather than you supporting me, so use the plugin anyway. But, this is just a thing that we do with each other on the internet where no matter what price I set on it, people can run around pirating it anyway, and always did. All the time that I was making Airwindows and selling stuff through Kagi through a thing that they had called the digital download system where you got one-time links. And I sold stuff for $50 through Kagi for years. And some months were amazing and some months were really terrible. Some months were many times what I can make on Patreon, but then there were other months that were virtually nothing and you could never count on it. And when I was selling plugins through Kagi, they were exactly the same way. They were only audio units. I didn't have VSTs at the time. But there was no DRM. There was no anything that was going to phone home or check on your computer or shut itself off or try to sabotage your system in any way, because I don't like that kind of stuff and I don't want people doing it, and I'm not going to do it. So I ran for 10 years without any DRM whatsoever. And that only goes to show that you can do things this way if you're willing to be pretty patient about it and not have too big demands of it. That way, I basically am waiting around for the individual plugins that just knock people's socks off. And if I don't run across one that blows a particular person's mind, they're never going to sign up to the Patreon, and that is completely okay. But, for instance, if you're a sound designer and you need to be able to make that sound of air blasting past a vehicle, and you haven't come across anything else that will do that because you haven't come across anything with this exact mechanic running at up to 4 poles for a steeper cutoff, maybe this does knock your socks off, and maybe this is something that you absolutely need and would perhaps even pay more than $50 for. In which case, jump on the Patreon if you can. That keeps me doing new stuff, and I'll continue coming up with more plugins for you to have. Thank you very much for bearing with me and paying attention to this stuff, because I'm just a little small voice in plugin making. I'm just Chris from Airwindows. I am pretty prolific. I work pretty hard. I think of some clever things now and then. So it's not like I'm a valueless developer, but I am just one person up here in Vermont, living on a budget in a place that's not expensive to live. And I'm not the kind of person, well, actually, that's not true. I was going to say I'm not the kind of person that gets publicity, and then I did that Evergreen Record study, and a guy did an op-ed about it recently based on my research that ran in the New York Times. So that was pretty cool, but it didn't give me any money. This is a weird time to be doing creative work. So it's up to you as to whether it's going to be a weird time for me or a weird and terrifying time for me. So far, it's not all that terrifying because there are people who are willing to help me out. And whether you are one of the people who are willing to help me out, or whether you're one of the people that I want to help out, because I know what it's like out there. I'm one of the people that's out there trying to scratch together a living. I know what that's like. So if I can help you out in turn because you're not in a position to help me out, that's what I choose to do. So whichever kind of person you are, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.